Dr. Anna Monroe was a brilliant chemist. She loved her work. Her passion for chemistry was evident in every experiment she conducted, and her colleagues admired her dedication and meticulous nature. The lab was her sanctuary, a place where she could explore the mysteries of science. One day, tragedy struck in her lab. It was an ordinary day, filled with routine tasks and experiments. But in a split second, everything changed. A tiny mishap, just two seemingly insignificant drops of a clear liquid fell onto the lab table. It was so quick, so minor, that it almost went unnoticed. It seemed insignificant at the time. Dr. Monroe glanced at the spill, shrugged it off, and continued with her work. After all, accidents happen in labs all the time, and this one seemed no different. Dr. Monroe was working with dimethylmercury, a highly toxic substance. She knew the risks, but she had handled it many times before without incident. She was wearing gloves, so she wasn't immediately concerned. The gloves were supposed to protect her from any harmful substances, and she trusted them implicitly. She continued her work, unaware of the silent threat she had just exposed herself to. Dimethylmercury is deadly. Its danger lies in its ability to penetrate barriers that are supposed to keep us safe. Even a small amount can be fatal. The warning labels on the containers were clear, but in the hustle and bustle of the lab, it was easy to become complacent. What Dr. Monroe didn't know was that dimethylmercury could penetrate through her gloves. The gloves, which she believed were her shield, were no match for the potent chemical. It entered her bloodstream within minutes. The chemical seeped through the material, making its way into her body, starting a chain reaction that would soon become catastrophic. The invisible enemy had begun its assault. Unbeknownst to Dr. Monroe, the dimethylmercury was now circulating through her system, attacking her cells and organs. The true extent of the danger was yet to be realized, but the clock had already started ticking. Dimethylmercury is not your average chemical. It's a wolf in sheep's clothing. It looks innocent, a clear, colorless liquid, but its beauty is deceiving. This substance is highly volatile. It evaporates easily and can be inhaled. Dimethylmercury can penetrate many materials. This includes latex and other standard laboratory gloves. Once it seeps through, it doesn't stay put. It rapidly enters the bloodstream, and then it begins its sinister work. At first, the symptoms were mild. They were so subtle that Dr. Monroe barely noticed them. Headaches that came and went, often dismissed as just another part of her busy day. Occasional fatigue that seemed to be a natural consequence of her demanding schedule. Dr. Monroe dismissed them as stress, a common ailment for someone in her field. She was, after all, engrossed in her research, often losing track of time and forgetting to take breaks. Days turned into weeks, and the symptoms persisted, growing slightly more noticeable with each passing day. Still, Dr. Monroe didn't connect the dots. She attributed the symptoms to the pressures of her work. She continued working, pushing herself harder, believing that sheer determination would overcome any physical discomfort. She attributed her growing discomfort to the long hours and demanding nature of her work, thinking it was just part of the job. But the truth was far more sinister. Unbeknownst to her, something far more dangerous was at play. The mercury was silently weaving its way through her system, infiltrating her body and causing the symptoms she had been experiencing. It was a silent invader, slowly but surely taking its toll on her health. It wasn't until much later that Dr. Monroe began to realize the gravity of her situation. The symptoms were not just stress or fatigue, they were the early warning signs of mercury poisoning. She knew she had to act quickly, but the damage had already begun. The mercury had been silently wreaking havoc on her body, and now she had to find a way to stop it before it was too late. Weeks later, the symptoms escalated. Dr. Monroe's speech began to slur. Her hands trembled. Walking became a challenge. She started experiencing bouts of confusion and memory loss. Her colleagues noticed. They urged her to see a doctor. Dr. Monroe reluctantly agreed. She couldn't shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Her body was betraying her, and she didn't know why. Section 5. A race against time, seeking help. The doctors were baffled at first. Dr. Monroe's symptoms didn't point to any obvious diagnosis. She underwent a battery of tests. Days turned into agonizing weeks with no answers. Her condition deteriorated rapidly. The once sharp scientist struggled to communicate. Her movements became increasingly erratic. Fear gnawed at her. What was happening to her? The medical team raced against time, desperately searching for the root of her ailment. Section 6. The grim diagnosis, mercury poisoning. Finally, the results came back. Dr. Monroe's blood mercury levels were astronomically high. The diagnosis was clear: mercury poisoning. It was a devastating blow. The news spread through the hospital like wildfire. Her colleagues were shocked. How could this have happened? Dr. Monroe was meticulous in her work. Then the truth dawned on them. The dimethylmercury, the accidental spill, the gloves that offered no protection. Section 7. The unraveling physical and mental deterioration. Despite the best efforts of the medical team, Dr. Monroe's condition worsened. The doctors and nurses worked tirelessly, employing every tool and technique at their disposal, but the situation was dire. The mercury had ravaged her nervous system. It infiltrated her brain, disrupting neural pathways and causing irreparable damage. The scans showed a grim picture, with areas of her brain lighting up in distress. She experienced seizures, lost her vision, and slipped into a coma. Each seizure was a violent reminder of the poison coursing through her veins, and the loss of vision was a cruel twist of fate for someone who had dedicated her life to science. Her family watched in horror as the vibrant scientist they knew faded away. They held on to each other, trying to find strength in their unity, but the sight of Dr. Monroe's lifeless body was almost too much to bear. The once brilliant mind was trapped inside a body that was shutting down. Her colleagues and students, who had always looked up to her, were left in shock and disbelief. The decline was rapid and merciless. The mercury, relentless and unforgiving, continued its assault. It showed no signs of stopping, and the medical team could only watch as it wreaked havoc on her body. The hazardous substance had turned a life of promise into a nightmare. It was a horrifying spectacle of the devastating power of this silent killer. The beeping monitors, the sterile hospital environment, and the eerie silence of the hallways all painted a picture of despair. The battle against mercury was one they were losing, and the cost was immeasurable. Section 8. The silent killer. Mercury's impact. Mercury is a potent neurotoxin. It doesn't discriminate. It attacks the brain and nervous system. It disrupts the delicate balance of the human body. In the case of Dr. Monroe, the dimethylmercury had crossed the blood-brain barrier with ease. It wreaked havoc on her neurons, the cells responsible for transmitting information throughout the body. The damage was irreversible. There was no known cure, no magic bullet to reverse the devastation. Section 9. A life cut short. The tragic end. Dr. Monroe's fight for life ended tragically a few months later. She never regained consciousness. Her death sent shockwaves through the scientific community. It was a stark reminder of the hidden dangers lurking in laboratories. The brilliant mind, silenced prematurely. A promising career, abruptly cut short. Dr. Monroe's death was a profound loss, a painful reminder of the fragility of life. Section 10. Lessons learned, a wake-up call. Dr. Monroe's death was a wake-up call. It forced laboratories around the world to reevaluate their safety protocols. The use of dimethylmercury was immediately restricted. New safety regulations were put in place. Training programs were enhanced. The scientific community mourned the loss of one of their own. They vowed to honor her memory by making laboratories safer for everyone. Section 11. Safety First, a legacy of prevention. Dr. Anna Monroe's story is a tragic reminder of the importance of safety in scientific research. It underscores the critical need for stringent safety protocols and the constant vigilance required when working with hazardous materials. Her legacy lives on in the enhanced safety measures that protect scientists today. Let her story serve as a constant reminder that no experiment is worth sacrificing human life. Safety must always come first.